Yes, interesting film, but the points that it made about the river's problems and the problems of the habitats next to the river have been known for decades. I've been in nature conservation since 1979. There has been increasingly improved legislation to tackle these things. It hasn't tackled them. What is the C&E bill going to bring to it that other acts were unable to achieve?
Do you want me to?
Jane, that's one for you.
Yeah, so the C bill is quite a different approach. I mean, you're so right, Roger, that we've had 50 years of, if not more, conservation efforts, and we've had something like 40 years of environmental stewardship schemes, and none of these things are working. But really, that's because we are not tackling the root causes of the issues. So the root cause, and that we touched on this in the film, the root cause of the degradation of nature is the food system, and the CE bill is very much dedicated or designed to tackle systemic change and the root cause of the climate nature crisis. So we don't talk about farming being a problem so much, which of course it is, and agriculture is the biggest source of pollution in rivers, but we talk about the food system as a whole. So we don't isolate farming, because farming is just, it's a symptom of our foods. The bad, poor management and destructive methods are all a symptom of or a result of the unsustainable food system that we have in this country, and it's one of the worst in the world. It's the worst in Europe, and it's almost worse than America, because of the drive for growth in too much meat, too much livestock, a lot of which is exported, and a huge amount of ultra processed foods, and all of these things are extremely damaging, and they drive just single crop varieties and monoculture. So monoculture of livestock, monoculture of crops, and they require huge resources. They take an enormous amount of effort in terms of natural resources to produce, and they're highly polluting. So this has all grown in this country massively, and across the European Union as well, and the Common Agricultural Policy drove that as well, which was pretty disastrous for nature across Europe. So in order to change that, we need to change the food system, and that's what the CE bill is really designed for. So just looking at some of it, we have clauses in there that go to the heart of this, that go to the heart of the impacts of unsustainable production and consumption, which is what we're doing, of goods and services, and all related trade, transport and financing. So it's the whole thing, and that's what we're trying to achieve with the CE bill. We're trying to get politicians to take up these policies as well, to get to the root causes of decline. Hope that answers.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. Tessa or Annabel, do you have anything else you want to add about what you think is maybe downfalls and pitfalls in existing sort of regulation that hasn't worked?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there has been long-term degradation of our systems in terms of the water industry. You know, we've seen poor regulation, lack of enforcement, and that has caused a lot of the problems, and why we've not seen the improvements. You know, there were improvements initially when the Water Framework Directive first came in, and the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. You know, there have been periods when improvements have been made in the water environment, but the long-term, you know, underfunding of the regulators, lack of direction of the regulators, and the poor performance through that has led to, you know, the kind of problems that we're seeing in the water industry. And that is obviously only one piece of the puzzle, but it's the kind of thing, you know, has happened across the board really, that polluters have not been held to account, and sadly that means that people will continue polluting, and so, you know, that is part of the problem. But we do have some good legislation, but it's not been implemented well. But we have not looked at the integrated solutions that we need, and that's where the CE bill should help, is to really bring those things together. We have a climate bill, we have Habitats Directive, you know, habitats regulations, we have the Water Act, you know, we have all these different bits of legislation that don't come together and talk together. And you know, that's where we need to get to a point where things are slightly more integrated, and we're thinking about things across the whole catchments, across the whole land management systems, so that we're looking at, you know, the water industry and the farming industry and highways and industry all together, so that we're solving the problems across the whole catchments and the whole land system.
Yeah, thanks for that.
So sorry, I would agree wholeheartedly with Jane and Tessa that lack of enforcement over the years has been a huge issue. I mean, we try very hard to work with farmers. Well, we have to work with them on a voluntary basis. They don't have to let us visit them. So we try to find ways to encourage them to change practices because it's good for their business. So obviously good soil structure is good for their business, managing their manure so that it stays in the field. And they don't need to buy in extra fertilizer. That's good for their business. So we try to find those win-wins, but there will always be those farmers who won't respond to that. And, you know, those gaps on the map, because they won't let us visit, you know, those are the ones that we need the Environment Agency to follow up with. And, you know, like I said, they've been under-resourced and they haven't been able to do it. But, I mean, Jane mentioned monocultures, and I would say that's been a big part of the problem. Is we've seen this increased specialization of farming over the years, where, you know, the Wye Valley is the sort of epitome of it, where you'll have a sudden sort of explosion of one type of farming in one area. So I think for the future we need to seriously look at stocking densities, not just per hectare, but also per catchment. So it's sort of happening through the nutrient neutrality, phosphate mitigation, but those are only in very protected sites. We need to look at it everywhere. And, you know, it's the same for, you know, cauliflowers, daffodils. If you get an intensity of one type of growing in one place, you will see problems, whether it's nutrient enrichment, sediment loss, or a certain type of pesticide. We all know that diversity and heterogeneity are good in life, and the same applies to land use.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for your responses, and hopefully that answers that question. Stephen, you have a question.
Yes, hi, it's Stefan. I'm sorry, my internet connection is weak, so I can't. It's difficult to put the video on. Well, first of all, I would just acknowledge the importance of soil, and organisations like the Soil Association have been arguing this for decades. It's really important. What I wanted to mention was, I don't know if this is appropriate, but I heard recently that Natural England have identified 25 large landscape areas throughout, I think throughout the UK, I don't know, maybe just England, to bring together all these things we've been talking about and more. And I think they've already putting into action 2 of them, and I can't remember where. But this seems to be something that seems to me very exciting and very positive for the future, that there's a realization that we're talking about large landscape areas of, I don't know how big, but huge, and it brings together some of the issues that have been mentioned today.
Thanks for that. Does anyone have anything to sort of add to that? Sort of comment on natural.
I think, Stefan, are you probably referring to the landscape recovery programme, which is Natural England funded, where groups of landowners, farmers can work together across a sort of minimum hectareage to achieve change at scale and across collective holding. I think that's probably what you mean, and I think there's a new round of bids just gone in now, I think, for another load of them. So yes, it is exciting, and it offers real opportunity.
Yeah, I'd second that. It is very exciting. But yeah, I mean, that we'd have to caveat it and say that it is all voluntary. It's not, it is driven by a desire to see improvements across landscapes, but it's very much driven by the larger landowners, and the average farmer. The average farmer is really struggles, and that they're the ones that Annabel was mentioning. Don't want visits, and a lot of them feel, I think, that they're really struggling to keep their heads above water, and so this is where we need to look at a systemic approach to changing the food system to make it easier for farmers to diversify, because they need to protect their own businesses from climate impacts as well.
Great. Thanks so much for your contributions to that. Hopefully that answers. Lawrence.
Hi there. Yeah, great to watch the video. For those that don't know, I'm Lawrence. I'm CEO at the Westcountry Rivers Trust. So sort of, but this is a question, because this is specifically a very political kind of bill, and a bill we're putting together. It was really around, you won't have failed to see in the news today, Rishi Sunak's comments on green policy, and sort of pushing back on that, on what they've had. And we've seen over the last few months them trying to do the same thing with nutrient neutrality. We've heard about kind of the cuts over the last 20 years to the Environment Agency and some of the issues there. So the question, I think, to the panel is really, is this government fit for purpose? And for that matter, is the Environment Agency and Natural England fit for purpose?
I can probably start with that. I'd say no. At the risk of upsetting people at Natural England, who are, and there are so many great conservationists working in this country, and the people at Natural England are absolutely fabulous. Tony Juniper couldn't be a better leader for Natural England, but their hands are tied, and as Annabel has been saying, and Tessa, the funding has been absolutely cut to the quick. So in terms of this government, I think starting with this government, I am absolutely staggered by the lack of vision and the lack of leadership to grasp the opportunities that we could have by restoring nature in this country. It's the single most really most effective solution that we're going to get in terms of adapting to climate impacts, and that it offers the most potential to grow the economy in the right area, and to create green jobs. It's such an exciting prospect. There are so many opportunities that we've just been working with scientists on our latest report that we can share with you. And why politicians don't understand this. We are meant to be a political organisation. We don't take sides. We are cross-party. We do have Conservative MPs backing this bill, but only, I would say, only 3 or 4. So generally, we feel that this government is not taking these opportunities, and it's not providing the funding and the solutions it does have through the Environment Act. They're largely based on voluntary expectations of farmers taking part in environmental land management schemes. A lot of them are very daunted by this. They feel they can't afford to change. They're too scared to change, and faced with a government that doesn't back them, doesn't lead and give certainty to businesses of all kinds, including farming. It's most exasperating. Don't know if Tess and Annabel have got any more to say about that.
I think,
carry on, Tessa.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think, for me, the recent rhetoric that we're currently being sold that a healthy environment is blocking progress on housing or economic prosperity is just really damaging and dangerous, and it has to stop. you know, we can have both. We have to have both. In fact, you know, we don't really have a future if we don't have both. So, you know, there's no good going for, you know, quick fixes and, you know, quick prosperity or things now, because the longer term problem is just storing up greater problems, greater costs, you know, and we cannot have a healthy future without building a healthy environment. So, you know, all the evidence points to that. All of the economic assessments demonstrate that the greatest risks to our economic future are environmental and nature-based, you know. So all the evidence, you know, from government departments, from the Treasury, from external bodies, from scientific, you know, advisors to the government, all point to that. So, you know, the fact that they insist on pitting environment against prosperity, I think, is really damaging and really dangerous. And you know, you hope that another party might do something differently if they came into power, but, you know, who knows?
I think Tessa and Jane have covered most of what I would have said, really, but I just think it's this, what really frightens me is I don't think that any other party apart from the Green Party obviously would have a different approach. They're still terrified by the sort of 4 or 5 year cycle of government, and on that basis, can any of them ever think long term enough, and also act, but also act decisively enough? And a government needs to govern, and I wish they would I wish they would listen to scientists and take this on, because, as somebody said, they're leaving it at the moment to people's goodwill, to farmers' goodwill. They're leaving it to people to decide when to insulate their homes. Why they can't offer interest-free lending to families to insulate their homes better, I don't understand. I think we need a national land use framework urgently, based on soil and the need for food, and all those corridors through, and you know, spaces for nature within it. It's all very, very doable. They've just got to get on with it, and stop prioritising the economy. And I think they underestimate the public. I think if they gave the public a chance to express their opinion, I think they'd be surprised at how fiercely even those hard-pressed families feel about this issue.
Yeah, I think you've covered that pretty well. I think just very quickly, I guess, from another viewer perspective, it's changing the narrative is what this is all about. It's saying that this is not exactly as you mentioned. This is not a barrier. This is actually an opportunity, a massive opportunity, and this is partly, which, you know, we'll cover at the end of this Q&A, why we thought this report was so important, because it's actually unlocking opportunities for health, for jobs, for prosperity. It's not a barrier, and it doesn't quite answer that question, but it sort of ties into it, which is the reason we work cross-party is we strongly believe that if we sit down and we provide the evidence of what the opportunities are, we can change people's minds. And although it's happened very slowly with Conservative MPs, they are changing their mind when we get that window. And the same's happening with Labour and the Lib Dems and Greens. And it's about how do we get that information of the opportunities in front of the right people. It's really going to be critical. Yeah, hopefully that answers the question. John.
Hi, thank you for it was a very interesting video, but yeah, I've got a couple of questions and also a couple of statements. I mean, I don't know whether people watched the Paul Whitehouse video about our troubled rivers a while ago. It was a really good summary of the state of our rivers, and it was yeah, and a depressing watch, one has to say. But there's a couple of things I want to say. I mean, I just to introduce myself, I'm a Southampton district councillor, and I'm on the exec, and my responsibility is for climate change and biodiversity and all that stuff. And I'm trying to find a way of a route whereby the council can really contribute to driving down emissions and helping a route for farming. Very particularly, I've talked to loads of farmers about how they can change their production methods and create a market whereby they can make a living, etc., etc. And there's I'm, you know, I mean, people have talked about pollution and the EA. I mean, their funding has basically gone down the toilet. They can't do their job, and that is a real problem. But and I used to live in. I mean, I don't know if people can remember the whole Nocton thing where there was this proposal for I think it was 10,000 head of cattle, zero grazing, and the slurry output from that, and the consequences of that. I was involved in that, and or I wasn't involved in it. I was involved in the campaign against it, and in the end, it was dropped. But this idea that and I think pretty much, I used to live in North Devon, and I don't think there's a single watercourse in North Devon that has a fish in it anymore. Now, and I've spoken to you know, old farmers and people that when I used to live there, I don't live there anymore, but where they used to go, and I used to in my childhood, illegally, I know, go tickling trout. And you know, and playing that game and taking it home, and you couldn't do that now. I mean, I would challenge anybody to find a stream in England that you could go tickling trout in, and that is an appalling situation to be in. Because I'm a district councillor, I'm interested in opinions as to how people think a district council can help. I mean, we're supporting various river challenges, and I also think we can take up cudgels when it comes to you know, where there is a particular polluter, and you know, it costs money to challenge people. I think that's something a district council can be a champion with. There's, yeah, sorry, I think I'm wittering on a bit, but there's a huge challenge here, and it is runoff from agriculture. I think is a big issue here. I mean, I go for walks occasionally, and with my dog, and down the Avon River locally, and often I see the foam drifting down, and foam to me is indicative of high nitrogen content, and that is because of runoff. And today, this afternoon, I was at a gathering where people were talking about regenerative farming, how to capture carbon in your and how that might actually become something that is a revenue for farmers, because they've generated that amount of carbon capture, and it was really interesting. And the technology exists, and it is appalling that we are not helping farmers through this. I know a lot of farmers that they know that there needs to be a change, but they are really scared by it all, because it requires a real shift and a possible loss of income, and they need their hands held. And I think that's something a council and other people and other agencies need to address, to help people who are, you know, they're just trying to feed their family, but and I think they largely recognise that there is a real issue. They're under pressure from all sorts of people, their suppliers, or the people they supply, and this is one of the projects that I'm trying to develop at the moment, is about reducing supply chains, buying local, and consuming local. And I think it's really important, and it's part of the equation as to how we address climate change. I'm going to shut up now. I could whisper after it.
That's a really good point. I don't know if who wants to start covering that, about how, you know, what can we do on a local government level and a local level, and how does that connect to a wider set of change that supports farmers to do what's best.
I'm happy to make a start, but that was it's quite an enormous topic. I mean, the organisations like us, Westcountry Rivers Trust and Devon Wildlife Trust, the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group, we are out there holding the farmer's hand very much, and trying to guide them through this, whether it's from trying to understand the legislation about managing slurry, or whether it's trying to find the right grant scheme to improve their situation. And it's interesting because when we made the film that you just watched, it was early May, and I said in the film that there wasn't an adequate incentive scheme. And since then, the situation has improved. It's not fixed, but it's getting a bit better. The scheme has become a bit simplified. They're adding more options in. Next year, I believe they're going to add in some agroforestry, which is a very hot topic in regenerative agriculture. So it's starting to move in the right direction. And our advisors do go out and they go through the calculations with farmers and try to find ways for them to access those schemes in a way that benefits the environment of their farm, but also enables them to keep producing food on the good bits of soil they've got, and then have that connectivity on the more marginal areas, and the unproductive field corners. So there are some positives in this, where we've got staff out doing England Woodland Creation Offer applications, and they're doing a lot of them. There are a lot of trees being planted. In the right place, not on the species rich grassland, but on sort of poor productive land. But at a district council level, it's actually quite difficult to know how to get involved. I mean, something that always amazed me about the River Wye situation was, how was it allowed to happen? And I don't quite understand how the planning system interacts with people who want to put up new buildings for poultry. And maybe they didn't, maybe they repurposed buildings that were used for housing beef animals. But just when you suddenly see a growth in one type of livestock in a small area, you're going to see huge problems. And so I think that's a level at which the local authority could get involved to really scrutinise planning. But then you need to be looking at the whole area and not just case by case. So it's complicated.
Right, no, I agree.
Contributing to sort of land use framework discussions and that sort of thing, it's very difficult. And the local consumption, I mean, we all desperately want to buy our food locally, don't we? But the majority of people are going to go to Tesco's, so that's what we need to crack. There are a lot of us who are enthusiastic enough to support farmers who have got much more localized supply chains, but most of the public, to be frank, haven't got the time or the wherewithal to be interested. So it's those big supply chain issues that we need to deal with.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's I mean, we have got in Devon some of the best producers in the country. We've got Riverford, who obviously were in the film, who have proved that you can change the market. And that's taken a lot of time. It's taken decades for Guy Watson to create that business with his teams of people and all the people that Annabel works with. And that's why we need systemic change. This is what I was talking about earlier with changing the food industry. The food industry, the big businesses and the big 6 or 9 big supermarkets, we need to see change there. We need to see an end to growth in these devastating products. All of the ultra-processed foods and the meat products. Meat consumption's going up, actually, not down, but it's not it's not buying fresh meat from local producers. It's all about meat products because they're value added. Supermarkets don't like fresh fruit and veg because it's got a short shelf life. They don't like organics. They hate organics because they've got an even shorter shelf life. They like everything packaged, and they like it in the right portions, and they like, even better, they like ready meals and processed meals that they get the very most out of. And this, we need to change the market, and our report covers this in quite a lot of detail. We've been working with Sustain, the Organisation for Better Food and Farming, and there are myriad solutions to creating local food markets, but it all does need leadership from the government. You know, we need to see food hubs so that farmers can get to market, they can access consumers directly, and in that way they can make a living out of diversifying into fresh fruit and veg, and diversify their land use. But they can't do it on their own. I mean, there are more solutions, more schemes coming along, as Annabel was saying, but it's still very marginal. We need government leadership, we need a new system, we need new legislation really to drive enough change at a greater scale and pace.
Tessa, do you have anything to add to that question?
Sorry.
I think John's wanting to come back in, actually.
Okay.
Well, I need to comment to say that I mean I completely agree, and that that there does need to be initiative from central government. But I do think there is stuff that one can do locally, and that's what I'm trying to achieve. But in order to promote local production, local consumption, and it requires an awful lot of things. And in terms of timescales, I don't know. There are so many things we're doing. I mean, what I was at today was this whole business of using carbon offsetting. You know, if you use regenerative techniques, and you can actually achieve negative carbon as an agricultural unit, and at Chagford being one particular example, and so you can then pay people for that, and I mean this is just one particular idea, but so there are ways that we can motivate farmers to sort of change to a more regenerative type of farming, and the consequential carbon benefit from that, but also generate a local market whereby people can get the benefit of that local produce, and that's basically what I'm trying to do is to build that local market so that you can do that. And I think I'm sorry, I think I'm taking this conversation off into a direction. We're talking about rivers here, and but it's sort of it is related insofar as that I think a lot of the problems with rivers is due to agricultural runoff, and if we can change that, that's huge. I mean, clearly the sewage issue is a big separate issue that also needs to be addressed. Yeah.
If I can just come back on the environmental markets, I think what you're talking about there, and things like carbon credits,
yeah,
are very effective, and we've used those, and we've set up schemes in some river catchments. And the ones that we've set up so far have been based around natural flood management, so providing flood mitigation and reducing the risk of flooding. And Flood Re have paid into those systems and councils have got involved in those systems, and we've set up community interest company so that any money that is made goes back into the community. and you're paying ecosystem services, and that might be, so you develop credits or units of land, which there'll be carbon units, there'll be nutrient neutrality units, then biodiversity net gain units, and so these are monetized so that actually businesses and investors can invest into nature-based solutions within catchments. And this is an opportunity for, we're never going to have enough public money to pay for everything that we want to deliver on the environment, because there's, countries virtually bankrupt, but actually there's quite a lot of investors who are happy to invest and are looking for opportunities to invest in the environment. And this has proved to be a very successful way to go about it. And if you look at the Wyre NFM example, so Wyre spelt W-Y-R-E, if you have a look at the Rivers Trust website, you'll find it, and that's an example of where a local district council has actually got involved in paying for markets, and other businesses have invested, and the landowners are involved in that scheme as well and get some payment from it. So it's quite an interesting way, and there are lots of schemes kicking off around the country that are looking at that kind of model.
Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah,
so there may be something that you could get in touch with us and we can talk about a bit more.
Yeah.
Right. And David. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. You're on mute. I'll try and unmute.
Right, is that better?
That's better.
Well, it's not entirely true what Jane said, I'm afraid, about supermarkets hating organic, because there are organic sections in supermarkets, albeit on a small scale. So it's not entirely true. Also, it depends on the supermarket. We do our big shop, that is, at Waitrose, which is one of the more ethical supermarkets. Although we do also have a veggie box from Riverford as well, but certain things we can't get, we get from Waitrose. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, probably a bad choice of words to say they hate organics, but they don't. They do marginalise them. They don't make a big, and Waitrose have actually reduced their lines over the last few years. I think it's to do with the cost of living crisis. Yeah, it's not. They don't push them, and we do work with some supermarkets, and we know what their attitudes are. And people just can't afford to spend that much more on organics in supermarkets. You can get organics food much cheaper going direct to suppliers, but as well that there are difficulties there, because a lot of people, obviously that's time consuming, and people don't have access so much. I live in North Oxfordshire, and we're really lucky. We have lots of organic producers here, and we have lots of non-organic producers that are still very good and sell direct to the public, but that's quite difficult in some areas.
That is cost is a stumbling block. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people who said they'd love to buy organic, but they just can't afford it. And some of those people are very green as well. So that's the problem. That's the problem we're up against.
Yeah, I'll quickly add, sort of anecdotally, but a few places I've lived have had sort of one is a social enterprise supermarket. It's called Locavore. It's in Glasgow. They're working a lot with local organic producers. It's sort of trying to make a supermarket model that's all based around local producers, and it's very popular. But yeah, exactly as you said, a barrier is that the whole food system means that they have a lot of barriers. In cost is obviously one of them. But yeah, and then the same as there's a place in Manchester, Unicorn, which is also, it's a co-op and a lot of organic produce, but exactly the same. It's sort of seen as a less convenient option. And I guess part of what we're talking about is we need to make the food system actually make it the most convenient option, is actually to do the right thing rather than it to be led purely on morality, because you've got to bring everyone along, and you can't you know, you can't make progress by shaming people who have barriers. So it's something, this is a wider point, but it's something that that's really important to us, is this idea of sort of climate and nature assemblies. You know, how do we bring people together to actually make sure that we're hearing all of these barriers rather than just presenting top-down solutions onto people. And this is a great conversation example why there's so many factors involved in, you know, the food system, in sort of, and what's going on with our rivers, that we really need to have more conversations like tonight about how do we get all these input, and what are the stumbling blocks, and what are the barriers, and what's standing in the way, because the outcomes, we'd like to think the majority of people are all for. It's how you go about it. You need to get some support around.
Yeah, I think also bringing people together is a way of keeping costs down in food production, because there are all sorts of cooperatives, and they're growing, and food hubs, and in urban areas as well. There's a fantastic organisation in London called Growing Communities, and they've been there for about 30 years, and they pool costs. They have they grow themselves, and then they have lots of suppliers, and everybody helps keep each other's costs down by pooling resources and getting what's good at a particular time. So if somebody hasn't got something, then it comes from another area, or they swap the product for something else, and they keep costs low by helping with transport. And then because they can all collaborate to keep costs to a minimum, they're able to supply to less well-off members of the public or communities. So they get veg boxes, and they get supplies of veg at a really knockdown rate, so that they're trying to make this a very democratic process. And this is ideal. You know, this is the sort of thing that brings communities together, and then all of these people reap the benefits in terms of being able to look after the environment in a better way, and leave some of their land fallow without growing all the time. So it's very much a way of life.
Thanks for that, Jane. I wonder, just realizing that we're a little bit short in time, if you want to continue and just speak a little bit about this, the Nature Rich UK report we've just done, and how does that touch on nature-based solutions, and why did we think it was important to make that report? Yeah,
so we wanted to produce this report because the last report we did was the Ambition Gap report. It was comments on the government's net zero strategy, and it was quite negative. It was about what's not being done, and what dire straits we're in. This is a much more positive report about the opportunities and the real benefits of nature-based solutions and restoring the environment. So by nature, what we mean by nature-based solutions is we really mean restoring nature and protecting it, so that we can then use the great power of nature to help us to create solutions to climate change and to adapt to the impacts like flooding and drought and overheating. And I've just put it into chat, actually, the report, so you can get a link to it. But we've split it into sections. We took the first section is about the Climate Change Committee's report on the risks from climate change, and its priority risks. It's got 8 priority risks, and they all relate to nature. So they're all about nature, in terms of how nature affects, how the restoration of nature affects business, how it affects well-being and health in this country. And it's really highlighting those risks. And then the report goes on to talk about the cost savings, and how capturing carbon, a big part of the research that we did, is about natural carbon capture, about restoring nature and ecosystems that are very, very efficient at capturing carbon. So we highlighted 4 key ecosystems, and they're agro or nature-based solutions: agroforestry, the creation of woodland and regeneration of woodland, restoration of peatland, and salt marshes, expansion and restoration of salt marshes. And we've shown in the report that you can use these ecosystems and they can draw down carbon more efficiently and much cheaper than engineered solutions that the government is just investing £20 billion in, direct air capture and storage and bioenergy and carbon capture. And these things are, I mean, we're not saying we don't need these things, we do need them. We need those engineered solutions to be researched, and we need to have them in the background. But what the government's suggesting is that they're going to pile all this money into them without them working anywhere at scale, and pretty much ignoring the fact that we need energy to get those systems up and running, and we don't have renewable energy at the moment. We don't have spare energy to create engineered solutions. If we're going to use renewables, we need renewables to cut emissions on heating our homes and driving our businesses. So things like BECCS and DACs are energy intensive at the moment. But restoring peatlands, that peatlands are going to draw down carbon, not for free, but we show in the report that the Office for National Statistics has worked out that the benefits far outweigh the costs of peatland restoration. And then you've got all the co-benefits like creating jobs in nature-based, nature restoration, and all kinds of other jobs as well, technical jobs, and in river catchments, for example, as well, the restoration of rivers. There are all sorts of knock-on benefits and jobs that can come from restoration of nature. So the third section of the report goes briefly into different ecosystems and the benefits of restoring them for various nature-based solutions, such as alleviation of flooding and drought. So Tess can talk about this a bit more in a minute, I'm sure, but we can create nature-based solutions in the landscape that enable us to save water on the land, which is what farmers really need to do, because drought is one of the biggest threats to our farming businesses. And then we go on to talk about the benefits for biodiversity. By default, well-designed nature-based solutions are going to increase biodiversity. They have to be well-designed. So we've got examples in there of the success at Steart Marshes, that the Wildlife and Wetlands Trust have found that at Steart marshes are drawing down an enormous amount of carbon, but the biodiversity benefits have been enormous. And also ecotourism, they're attracting a lot more people. This is another benefit for jobs in the economy, for local economies. And they're mixing it with food production. So they've got grazing. Grazing is a really important part of some of the restoration projects. We also go into what's wrong with, we have a section on jobs in the economy. We refer to many other reports that have been done. So if you're looking at the report, it's really worth looking at some of those other reports that are linked there as well. Oxford University Nature-Based Solutions Initiative did a fantastic report on all of this in detail, much more detail than we've gone into here. about the benefits of each type of nature-based solution. And then we talk about the jobs. There's so many different opportunities for jobs in nature tech. I mean, one of the things that we need to really ramp up is expertise in things like monitoring natural carbon capture, monitoring health and biodiversity, monitoring the health of rivers. All of these things we need technical expertise in, and we don't have it. We don't have enough of it. And then we go on to talk about the food industry. And this year there was very little media coverage on it this year, but the UN had a food systems summit, which was brilliant. And the Food Systems Summit has now become part of the COP27 had the first one, and then there was one at the Biodiversity COP15, and there's going to be another Food Systems Summit at COP28. But it really highlights what's being done around the world in terms of changing food systems for the benefit of nature, but also the knock-on benefits for public health are really being pushed at the Food Systems Summit. So we're covering a lot in there, but one of the things we do highlight is that the food system in this country is costing the country around £74 billion a year in lost revenue from early death, lost revenue from people not going to work because of ill health, food-related disease, as well as direct NHS costs. Diabetes is costing the UK 10 billion a year at the moment. So systemic change, food system change is going to have so many more benefits for health, the health of people and of the environment. So we've tried to cover a lot, but there's I hope there's a lot to be optimistic about in the report.
Thanks for that, Jane. I don't know if people have any questions about the report or any sort of comments just before we wrap up. Roger, yeah.
Yes, I did read the nature report, and as always, I go straight to the wetland bits because that's the bits I know best. And I noted the benefits of flood alleviation by using land beside rivers for storing water. And of course, there's always the devil's in the detail here, because there are some kinds of wetlands that are not dependent on water from rivers. They're dependent on groundwater coming out somewhere near the river. And if you raise the river water level, you can often occlude those. The sad thing is that groundwater generally is so sadly depleted that a lot of these wetland communities are disappearing anyway, and people are turning to river water as a sort of compensation for not having the groundwater available, and that is leading to a great loss of biodiversity in wetlands.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make. I mean, this is a huge problem, isn't it, for farming and for biodiversity generally. We do touch on in the report on water for farming, and it's taken from main supply, it's taken from rivers. But as farmers take water from rivers, obviously that's going to have a detrimental effect as well, isn't it, for biodiversity and for the catchments.
The focus on the water companies and the recent criticism is justified, but I think one of the downsides of it is that it's starting to put an even greater disconnection between people and the water supply. And I think, I mean, when I was a child, you sort of had a bath once a week. You know, I know people who shower 2 or 3 times a day, and I heard a horror story recently that most holiday accommodation now tries to have a hot tub because it's good for business, and they're legally obliged to empty that hot tub and refill it between every new visitor. And I just think our water consumption has gone up massively. And while the focus is on the water companies and their, mistakes and mismanagement, we do need to put some onus on people. Do people really need to shower 2-3 times a day? And obviously we don't want to do it through money because that disadvantages the poor. But we've got to take some responsibility for it as a population as well. But in terms of water storage on farms, absolutely, there's huge potential for that, and I think farmers are up for it as well, as long as they can make it pay.
Mm.
Great. Dave has a question, then David after that.
Yes, I just want to pick up on what Annabel just said. Just about people having showers. Absolutely right. Most people do not need to take a shower 3 times a day. But when we do have a shower, is what I do, is wet ourselves, soap up, and then just turn the shower on to rinse off. So therefore, the shower's only on for a minimum amount of time. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks for that, David. Dave and Devon, you got a question or a point?
Is that me, Dave T?
That's you. Yeah.
Okay. I'm a bit sort of depressed, I'm afraid, by the announcements made by Rishi Sunak today. But I'm wondering, is there a way that we can promote this report, as individuals? How can we contribute as far as the report is concerned?
That's a great question. So we've got the report online. We also have printed copies. So some local groups and people that are supporting, the climate and ecology bill and what we're doing, you can just put your email and we can send reports to you, because we've found it really effective when if you try and meet with, whether it's an MP or someone in your local council, if you go with, I'm wanting to speak about what's in this report, and you provide something, they're much more likely to have an appointment. And what's really been effective, we found this a little bit with the Ambition Gap report, is it just opens a door for a conversation that isn't sign this bill. And the bill, that comes with party politics, which is what's the party saying on this bill. But actually, if you say, what do you think of this report? Or email it to them, or mail it to them, or try and meet with them, we find it really effective as opening a door. We found that recently with a few local groups. So if you want to pop it in your chat, or actually I'll put my email on the chat, it's probably easier because then other people can. And if you either send me your email or send me a mail address, we can send out a copy. Because partly we sort of ran out of time on this, but what we do quite regularly is have these calls that are check-ins on the campaign, what you can do locally. And some of it is some of that sort of knowledge sharing of what works and what doesn't, because we recognize that MPs and councillors get 1,000,001 letters and things through the door, but there's really positive ways of having great conversations with them. And part of it's through things like, asking to meet about the report and taking a copy with you. Because then it becomes much less party politics and I want you to back it and they've got a position. You talk about that and it's a natural entryway into why do people want, why is the climate ecology bill important? And, John had mentioned, what can people do on that local level? And there's a lot that people can do. And there's certain things that need that holistic joint up approach. And we found also local councils use, if they can get their council to back the climate ecology bill, because it has very clear directives in it, halting and reversing nature loss, we find councillors use it as a mechanism within committee meetings. They actually go in and say, how does that policy of this, how does scrapping this, how does voting for that lead to reversing nature loss? And it means that on a much wider level, using these reports and using local motions is a really good way of saying we've all signed up to reversing and halting nature loss. How do we it's a way of holding people to account and saying, is that decision compatible with what we've already said, which is obviously subjective, but we find it at least springs debate. But yeah, I'm happy to get a report over. That's a good way. Sharing the video, we'll have it up on YouTube, and we'll share it out by email. Yeah, there's two ways you can really help with the report.
Thank you.
I don't know if Jane or wants to add anything else about best ways to get the report out there. Is there anything else you can add? Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry about that. Yeah, social media course. Always a good one.
Great. John. Oh. John.
Yeah, thank you. Just a very brief question, and possibly a little bit tangential, but one of the big problems locally is, or I mean across the country, is local renewable energy, community renewable energy projects, which I think is really crucial to our progress on climate change. And there was the local electricity bill, and that got subsumed into the energy bill, and then that's now sort of, I think, on its second reading, but I don't know. But given Rishi Sunak's latest pronouncements, or leaks, whatever you want to call them, it worries me that that's never going to happen. And it's I don't know. Does anybody have a view on where we are with this, and whether there is a real possibility of our getting a local electricity bill equivalent? I mean, it's now a clause in the energy bill through, because it will make such a difference to community energies and just the whole climate change challenge that we face.
Yeah, it's a big question to end on. I can't speak directly to that bill, but generally speaking, we recognize that the direction of travel doesn't look good in terms of how do we pass quite, the urgent bills and action that's needed. But we just have to, keep trying to reason with expertise, and also recognize the level. Democracy is a powerful thing in that way, and with the climate ecology bill in particular, Zero Hour is really working on. We work across all parties, which means that when it comes to elections, where's the levers of how we're going to be. So we speak to all parties and say, if you want to get into government, we know these policies are popular. We know that climate action is popular. We know that the environment's really high on people's priorities list, and it often gets overlooked. And yeah, it's one way that we don't lose hope, is we say, actually, things change based on that. And how do you work around the election? Up until then, I think we are in a difficult place to make sure that it's a really difficult place, knowing what's going to happen in the run up to the election. There's a lot of really exciting bills going, in their second reading, but we just have to keep trying and hoping we can build support. But I guess my wider point is that we can use the election as a springboard for a lot of this, get it on people's manifestos. If we can make a good enough argument to that and get their backing going into an election, it's a much easier way than trying to convince someone at the end of their tenure as a politician. So it is a tricky one. I don't have a very good answer, but I think
I wasn't expecting a very good answer. I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, no, I think I recognize that. I recognize where we're at is a really difficult, but I was equally disappointed and sort of taken aback by today's announcement. But for every announcement like that, there is great reports and politicians surprising you and turning around and agreeing with you when you don't quite expect it. And we're hoping that Derek Thomas is going to sort of get the ear of a few people in the Conservatives to realise what is the economic, social and health benefits of this, and it doesn't have to always be as polarising as it looks on the outside. So hopefully. Does anyone want to make any final questions or remarks? No. Okay, well, I'll end by saying thank you so much for everyone for attending. Thanks. Yes, sorry, David.
Thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome. And thank you in particular to Jane, to Annabel and to Tessa for giving your time and expertise. I think a lot of people have got a lot from your answers and given a lot of clarity. And yeah, help share the report, help share the video. We'll have an email with a link to the full video coming out soon. The reports, yes, on our website, zerohour.uk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was wonderfully informative. It's so helpful. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Bye.